Your fingertips are going numb. The wind cuts through your reindeer hide like it isn't even there. You've been walking since dawn, and the sun is already sinking again. Barely 4 hours of pale light before the darkness swallows everything. This is 22,000 years ago. This is the last glacial maximum. And right now, in the 21st century, the average person sitting in climate-controlled comfort would die of hypothermia in under 6 hours if dropped into that world with nothing but the clothes their ancestors wore. The Ice Age wasn't one long freeze. It was a series of glacial periods stretching back 2.5 million years, with the last one ending only 11,700 years ago. Your ancestors lived through the coldest parts. They survived when mile-thick ice sheets covered a third of the planet's land surface. But survival didn't mean comfort. It meant a kind of physical and mental endurance you can barely imagine. Start with the cold itself. Temperatures across Europe and northern Asia averaged 10 to 15 degrees Celsius colder than today. That doesn't sound catastrophic until you realize what it actually meant. Permafrost extended down to what is now southern France. The ground stayed frozen year-round. Trees couldn't grow. The landscape your ancestors walked through looked like the tundra of northern Siberia today. Vast treeless plains of low shrubs, grasses, and mosses stretching to the horizon. Anthropologist Brian Fagan, in his 2004 book The Long Summer, described Ice Age Europe as a polar desert punctuated by fierce winds. Those winds were constant. They roared across the open steppe at speeds that would make standing upright difficult. Your skin would crack and bleed. Your lips would split. And that's just the environmental baseline. Now add the animals. You weren't at the top of the food chain. Cave lions, 25% larger than modern African lions, hunted in prides across the tundra. Short-faced bears, the largest mammalian land predators of the Pleistocene, stood over 3 meters tall on their hind legs and could run as fast as a horse. Packs of direwolves moved in coordinated hunts. Your ancestors weren't just trying to survive the weather. They were trying to avoid becoming food. How often did that fear shape your ancestors' decisions? But here's the twist. Your ancestors didn't just hide from megafauna, they hunted them. Archaeological evidence from sites like Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic, dated to around 26,000 years ago, shows that small groups of humans were taking down woolly mammoths. Not occasionally, regularly. Mammoth bones were used to build shelters. Mammoth fat was burned for heat and light. Mammoth hide became clothing. Archaeologist Olga Sofer spent decades studying these sites and found that a single mammoth could provide enough resources to sustain a group of 20 people for months. But killing a 6-ton animal with nothing but stone-tipped spears and wooden shafts required more than bravery. It required intimate knowledge of animal behavior, perfect coordination, and the ability to read the landscape for ambush points. One mistake and you'd be trampled or gored. Your ancestors lived with that risk every time they needed food. And food was never guaranteed. Researcher John Speth, studying Ice Age subsistence patterns, estimated that during the harshest winters, caloric intake could drop by 40%. Your ancestors weren't just hungry, they were starving in cycles. The body adapts, but slowly. You'd lose weight. Your immune system would weaken. Infections that your body fights off now without you noticing would become life-threatening. A simple cut could turn septic. A cold could become pneumonia. There were no antibiotics, no painkillers, no emergency rooms. If you got sick, you relied on your group's knowledge of medicinal plants and your own body's ability to heal. Most of the time, that wasn't enough. So how did anyone survive? The answer is knowledge. Not written knowledge, not recorded anywhere, but knowledge passed down through oral tradition and embedded in every tool, every technique, every carefully chosen campsite. Your ancestors knew which plants stayed edible under snow. They knew how to find frozen carcasses and scavenge what predators left behind. They knew how to make fire in wind and rain. A skill so critical that archaeological evidence from Chauvet Cave in South Africa shows humans were controlling fire as far back as 1 million years ago. By the Ice Age, fire wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between life and death. And making fire wasn't easy. You'd need a hand drill or a fire plow, tools that required dry wood and hours of friction to create an ember. Then you'd need tinder, kindling, and constant attention. Let the fire go out at night, and you might not survive until morning. Clothing was just as sophisticated. Forget the crude fur wraps you see in movies. Analysis of needles made from bone and ivory, found at sites across Europe and dated to 30,000 years ago, shows your ancestors were sewing tailored garments. Anthropologist James Adivasio, who studied Upper Paleolithic textiles, found evidence of woven fibers and layered insulation. Your ancestors wore fitted tunics, leggings, boots, and hooded parkas, all designed to trap body heat and shed moisture. They understood that sweat was dangerous. Get wet, and the cold would kill you. So, they layered animal hides with the fur facing inward for warmth and outward for wind resistance. They stuffed grass and moss into their boots for insulation. They greased their skin with animal fat to prevent frostbite. This wasn't primitive, this was engineering. But even with all that knowledge, your ancestors couldn't survive alone. Isolation was fatal. Anthropologist Polly Wiesner, studying modern hunter-gatherers in harsh environments, found that survival depended on reciprocal networks. You shared food when you had it, knowing others would share with you when you didn't. You traded tools, information, and labor. You formed alliances through marriage and kinship. These networks extended across hundreds of kilometers. If your group faced a failed hunt or a brutal winter, you could travel to another camp and be taken in. Without that social safety net, a single bad season would wipe you out. Do you have that kind of reciprocal network today? And then there's the mental weight. Imagine living in near total darkness for months. Winter days at high latitudes lasted only a few hours. The rest was cold, black night. Seasonal affective disorder, the modern condition caused by lack of sunlight, would have been constant. But your ancestors didn't have the option to shut down. They had to keep moving, keep hunting, keep the fire burning. Psychologist Randolph Nesse, studying evolutionary medicine, has argued that many of the anxiety and stress responses modern humans experience are adaptations to ancestral environments where vigilance was survival. Your ancestors lived in a state of chronic low-level stress. A snapped branch could mean a predator. A shift in the wind could mean a storm. You couldn't relax. Ever. Yet somehow, they didn't just survive. They created. The oldest known figurative art comes from this period. The Lion Man sculpture, carved from mammoth ivory and found in Hohensteinstadel Cave in Germany, is 40,000 years old. The cave paintings at Chauvet in southern France, dated to 36,000 years ago, show horses, lions, and rhinoceroses rendered with anatomical precision and dynamic motion. These weren't crude scratches. These were masterpieces. Archaeologist Jean Klotz, who studied Chauvet extensively, described the art as evidence of symbolic thinking, abstract reasoning, and possibly spiritual belief systems. Your ancestors, in the middle of an ice age, were painting by firelight deep inside caves. They were telling stories. They were making meaning. Why did they prioritize that? Because meaning mattered as much as calories. Anthropologist Jerome Lewis, studying Congolese hunter-gatherers, found that music, dance, and ritual were integral to group cohesion. They reduced conflict, they reinforced cooperation, they helped people endure hardship. Your Ice Age ancestors likely did the same. They sang, they danced. They gathered around the fire and told stories about the hunt, about the ancestors, about the spirits in the animals and the land. Those stories weren't entertainment. They were survival technology. They encoded knowledge, transmitted values, and bound the group together. Lose the group and you lose everything. And yet, for all their resilience, most people didn't make it to old age. Analysis of Ice Age skeletal remains shows that average life expectancy was around 30 to 35 years. Infant mortality was staggering. If you survived childhood, you had a chance. But injuries accumulated. Broken bones healed poorly. Teeth wore down from grit and food. Arthritis set in early. By the time you reached 40, if you reached 40, your body was worn out. Paleoanthropologist Eric Trinkhaus, studying Neanderthal and early human remains, found evidence of healed fractures, infections, and degenerative diseases in individuals as young as their 20s. Pain was normal, disability was common, and still, your ancestors kept going. So why wouldn't you last a single day? Because surviving the Ice Age required a combination of skills, knowledge, physical conditioning, and social bonds that take a lifetime to develop. You'd need to read the weather, track animals, make fire, build shelter, sew clothing, navigate by stars, and cooperate seamlessly with others, all while enduring cold that modern humans avoid at all costs. You'd need calluses thick enough to handle frozen tools, lungs conditioned to Arctic air, a digestive system adapted to a high-fat, high-protein diet, and a mind capable of functioning under relentless stress without breaking. Your ancestors had all of that. You don't. Not because you're weak, but because you've never had to build it. The modern world has outsourced survival. You don't need to know how to make fire because you have a lighter. You don't need to track animals because you have a grocery store. You don't need to endure the cold because you have central heating. Those are victories. They represent tens of thousands of years of accumulated knowledge and technology. But they've also created a distance between you and the raw competence your ancestors needed just to see another sunrise. And here's the final twist. Your ancestors didn't think of themselves as extraordinary. They didn't marvel at their own resilience. This was just life, the only life they knew. They woke up cold. They stayed cold. They went to sleep cold. And they did it again the next day. Because they had no choice. Because the alternative was death. Because somewhere deep in their biology and their culture was the understanding that survival wasn't guaranteed. It was Earned one day at a time, one decision at a time, one shared meal, and one tended fire at a time. Your fingertips are warm right now. The walls around you hold back the wind. The lights stay on with the flick of a switch. This is 2026. This is the world your ancestors built by enduring what you never could. And the distance between their cold and your warmth is the entire story of human civilization.